And with that sense of bonhomie and physical chemistry, they later meet in bilateral context. So they already have a certain baggage here, which is positive baggage. We normally talk of baggage as negative. So that is the shift which is occurring. That when they meet on bilateral forums to discuss bilateral issues, they have so much positive energy already generated in multilateral forums. That is the fundamental shift which is, to me, clearly occurring. How is that positive energy expanded? There are several other things that also explain how is that positive energy expanded. The fundamental bilateral problematic issues have been issues of boundary settlement. Territoriality underlay this problem of China and India. And all the narratives of relationship comes out of that sense of territoriality being very, very important for both China and India. There is a fundamental change in that, how territoriality is understood today. I very often describe, if you ask a young man in an urban center how to milk a cow, which is a very normal way humans have grown, he will just ask you to hold and Google it. So both generation of knowledge and distribution of knowledge is fundamentally changing. All human knowledge, apologies if I'm getting distracted and I'm saying something which is almost like preaching in a religious session. All human knowledge has been generated by 5 fundamental senses of human body. Having an interface with nature around us. Whether it is brain surgery or it is poetry, everything is generated out of that experience. The touch of most advanced societies with terra firma is transforming. The touch with Mother Earth, if I can use that expression, is changing completely. Because as I said, we are either in virtual space or in outer space. Same is true of distribution of knowledge. Distribution of knowledge itself creates new knowledge. It seems we know everything. And that is why I said I may not give you any new knowledge. But very often, excessive onslaught of stereotypes. Because if you know everything about everyone, then it depends on if I Google before I speak to Jim in New Delhi and I want to introduce him, and I have checked his new CV, that may be dated CV. I may describe him completely different than who he is. But I will have the confidence of knowing everything. So very often stereotyping is what is happening. So how knowledge is generated, how discourses are built, and how knowledge is distributed is fundamentally transforming. And very often I describe that is my hope where boundary problem of China and India will be resolved. Because territory itself is becoming little less important. Some of you may recall that in 1962, China and India had a border war, and there was a popular sentence at that time to say, until every inch of Indian territory is retrieved, without of course knowing where was the territory and how to establish that is our territory. Because these are completely barren tropical forests or glaciers. You can't even establish whose cows were grazing and who were collecting taxes. But that language is altering fundamentally. There is even a set of negotiations which involve discussions on regional free trade area, which means overlapping the border without even settling it. So that is fundamentally changing, which, to come back to the point, helps generate that positive energy. Because the entire discourse of knowledge is changing. Second set of larger forces which are helping this positive energy through multilateralism to influence bilateral relationship is not only knowledge but productivity. Knowledge is one activity, productivity is another human activity. Productivity also is shifting. United States, for example, is seen as a model of economic growth, and you have 1% of people, if I'm right, in agriculture. In our case, bulk of population is in agriculture. So we are shifting human activity from mining and agriculture to manufacturing to services. Every next step makes you more cosmopolitan, more global. And if our societies are shifting from primary to secondary to tertiary activities, then so will our discourses, so will our lifestyles. And that also makes us feel comfortable in multilateral forums. Both China and India seem to have stakes there because that is the way of life. Services would mean collaborating with more and more societies. And that generates positive energy in multilateral forums and influences bilateral relations. Let me not just keep giving only very rosy picture. Both China and India also have very specific shades and tones of what they mean when they say multilateralism. In fact, both of them have their own specific understandings. And they apply those understandings on the ground and create more differences. Whether it is Aristotle or Clausewitz, when idea has an interface with reality, the friction generates deviations. So the idea of table and the real table may not be same. So Chinese, when they apply multilateralism, for instance, in West Asia, it's completely different than how they apply in Central Asia, than how they apply in East Asia and South Asia. I could expand on that, but I'll leave it in case there are questions. Likewise, India. How India applies multilateralism in South Asia can be shade different than how it applies to East Asia. And in multilateralism of both China and India, who is in, who is out is very interesting. In many sets of multilateralisms of China and India, India may not be in, and in Indian vision, China may not be in. So multilateralism does create positive energy, influences bilateral relations, but it also could have its own frictions. For example, there is this Bay of Bengal community which is described as BIMSTEC. India is allergic to have China involved in that. Chinese also have a separate major project on Mekong River. They have their own project. India has its own engagement. We also have something called Ganges Mekong Initiative. Likewise, in Shanghai Cooperation Organization, there is this discussion that India could become a member because energy security and terrorism are two most important issues for SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and India sees itself as a deserving candidate to intervene in those issues. But Chinese would always like to bracket India with Pakistan. So there are reasons which can also generate new frictions in bilateral relationships triggered by multilateral relationships. Then of course there is also this issue of how gradually they have tried to overcome some of these frictions. And a good example is China being accepted as an observer in South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which is called SAARC, in 2005, and India being likewise accepted as an observer in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So organizations that China and India respectively thought are their backyards or their own spheres of influence are gradually opening up for others, including mutually between China and India. China clearly is seen as the most influential observer in SAARC now. They had a recent meeting in Maldives where China, on the eve of this summit, opened its own mission in Mali and was seen as the most active of participants in the SAARC meeting. India cannot claim to be equally active in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But that is clearly where the distinction again is. And I think I will close in next 5 to 7 minutes and then look forward to comments and questions. Is as this positive energy gets generated because they are finding greater stakes in multilateral forums and organizations, and as this positive energy influences bilateral relations, it seems there is a greater understanding and sense of internalizing this reality that China and India share an asymmetric relationship. For a long time, this was a big hurdle. It was difficult for Indian scholars, officials, politicians to come to terms with the fact that over years it has become an asymmetric relationship. And that, I think, is a clear positive outcome of this shift towards multilateralization, that relationship is increasingly understood much better, because increasingly Indian side is able to accept it's an asymmetric relationship, and Chinese would of course use same leverages which are available to India far more effectively than Indians will be able to use same leverages. Almost final point that I wish to share with you before I close for today is this whole sense of what I call 6 constituencies in India of China relationships. This positive drift has clearly resulted in something that can be quantified today. Traditionally, we had 3 constituencies which influenced China policy. They were mostly diplomats. There were not much traffic between China and India. So only people who knew about China are people who traveled to China. They were posted in China. Or you had people who were posted on the border. So generals, soldiers, and a very minuscule community of people who knew the language. Incidentally, given the situation of cultural revolution, the whole set of tensions and war, all 3 constituencies had negative narratives of China. They thought everything about China was bad, and so were their experiences. To the new 3 constituencies which are now being added are what I call very often, not a very respectable way of describing, small town, small time entrepreneurs. There are flights full of these people from all over the country who travel to China, and they just buy parts of products there, assemble them and sell them in the country. They have direct benefit from China's boom, so they see China as in positive light. And the second set of people are now increasingly what I would largely describe travelers. They could be tourists, they could be academic exchanges, there could be business conferences, there could be people who are passing by Shanghai because lots of flights to West Coast, for example, would come by Shanghai. And China does something completely mesmerizing to short-time traveler. And I almost dare say that perhaps no other civilization can compete with Chinese in orchestrating. This is an art, how to orchestrate a positive picture. I'm reminded of my being in Beijing when Olympic Committee, International Olympic Committee had traveled to Beijing. Beijing was like a garden. But so much of Beijing was artificially like a garden because these were plastic flowers, green lights on the dry grass, which not many other societies perhaps can achieve. In fact, in some ways, Indians are opposite. We thrive. So the first 3 pages of major dailies are about crime and ransom and other things. And in China, it's very recent that some tabloids, small newspapers now do talk about crime. Otherwise, all major news agencies, newspapers don't tell you anything about it. So if I live in Beijing, I live in bliss. There is absolutely nothing No suicides on the campus, no burglars, no thieves, absolutely nothing. So there's a fundamental distinction between these two civilizations in some ways. So short-term travelers, to come back to my point, and as a teacher I do get distracted, sorry again. So these short-term travelers again have a tremendous positive spirit about China. They think everything about China is something we should learn, we should almost ape, do the same thing. Third positive constituency which is new is students. And my professor used to once say that ultimate colonization is one of brain. That is why most of our elites in third world are educated in your universities here. So some of your universities could give a list of 36 heads of state who are currently ruling as former students. 10,000 plus Indian students, largely in medicine, are now in China in a matter of just 6 or 7 years. Sudden boom of Indian students in China. And as I said, they are very good in organizing these activities. They are given separate buildings, which are sometimes known as India buildings. And they're provided possibly with Indian food. All teaching is in English. It's not in Chinese. So these large number of upcoming young doctors are all also happy about what is happening to them in China. So what I'm saying is 3 constituencies of old times and 3 constituencies of positive time. Not only we understand that we are asymmetric, we also are beginning to be in certain awe of China, that maybe we should do same things. Maybe we should keep China in good humor. Maybe we should even learn things how to do from the Chinese. And that facilitates the positive energy from multilateral to bilateral relationships very clearly much more. So it's as I would say, fairly confusing and complex picture that I'm painting here. But there is a fundamental shift in the larger canvas. It's not that from all chaos we have landed in the bliss, but new kind of positive energy is entering bilateral relationships, and that is what I call multilateralization. In fact, I wrote a piece last April for what is this East-West Center in Washington DC, and they titled it "Multilateralizing Chindia." This is another also very positive way of describing. I do a column Chindia Watch for a Shanghai Daily actually. So there is a fundamental drift in the relationship which could be related to immediate triggers like economic restructuring, or to larger abstract triggers of production and distribution of human knowledge and the shift in productivity of humankind. That now gives me hope potentially that we may not find issues that were so critical to the relationship in keeping us apart as critical. So the very connotations of issues that made China and India so suspicious of each other may not stay as they were. But that automatically does not mean all bonhomie, all clear understanding, because as I mentioned, there are new frictions that also emerge out of that relationship. Let me close here, and I would be very happy to answer specific questions or respond to comments. I often fear when I do this monologue that I may be speaking things that may not interest several people in the audience. So I'm more confident in second part, where I know at least, even if my answers are not very satisfying, at least they're addressing curiosities of people amongst audience. Thank you so much, and I'm so happy to be here.